Ama. Está andando pelo passeio do canal que divide a cidade. Algumas barcaças navegando lentamente nas primeiras horas da manhã. À esquerda está a passarela de inspiração náutica com tábuas estilo convés e torres tipo mastros. À direita está a curva do rio que se volta para o leste depois da ponte Waterloo, em direção ao dono de Catedral St. Paul. Ela sente o sol começar a se erguer. No ar, ainda uma brisa antes de a cidade ficar entupida de calor e fumaça. Uma violonista toca alguma coisa devidamente inspiradora mais adiante no passeio. A peça de Ama, a última amazona do reino de Daomé, estreia no Teatro Nacional essa noite.
Chegou um ponto em que os habitantes de Marte não podiam mais negar o aquecimento do seu planeta ou a escala da destruição que estava por vir. Em uma última tentativa desesperada de preservar sua civilização, eles construíram vastos canais conectando os polos do planeta à grande extensão de terra arrasada que cobriu o resto da superfície. O degelo anual das camadas de gelo polares produziria a água necessária para o cultivo de alimentos suficiente para a sobrevivência de pelo menos mais uma geração.
Educação indígena. A educação na aldeia indígena começa desde a primeira idade. Não segue os padrões de sala de aula. É um aprender sem pressa na solidariedade. Aprende que a agitação da formiga e o canto do sapo indicam que a chuva vem aí. Aprende a apreciar desde pequeno um bom peixe assado com vinho de açaí. Aprende que na arte de pescar só se pesca o que vai precisar. E a calma é importante para a flecha no peixe acertar. Aprende com os mais velhos, nossa memória viva, com os espíritos conversar e deles a permissão receber para na mata entrar.
Eu não tinha porra nenhuma pra fazer lá. Quer dizer, por que será que moro com a minha ex-namorada, sua nova namorada e a ex-namorada dela? Como é que alguém pode se sentir bem assim? Eu poderia estar escrevendo essa história de uma cela de cadeia. Engraçado, né? Ted e Alice, antes da minha partida, disseram: nada é tão ruim que não possa piorar ele. Eu não sabia mais o que fazer. Peguei um voo sim, eu fiz isso. Pra Portland. E a Julie e a Chris me buscaram no aeroporto. Eu estava muito doidona no avião.
Encontrei ela ali, hoje de manhã, de barriga para cima. Revelou Dona Elodia, indicando um ponto na praia onde se juntava o lixo que o mar trazia ou desenterrava. Troncos, sacolas plásticas, garrafas. Envenenada? Acho que sim. O que fizeram com ela? Enterraram? Dona Elodia fez que sim com a cabeça e disse, meus netos. Lá em cima, no cemitério? Não, aqui mesmo, na praia. Muitos cães do povoado morriam envenenados. Havia quem dissesse que eram mortos de propósito, mas Damares não podia acreditar que existissem pessoas capazes de fazer algo assim e achava que os cachorros comiam por engano as iscas com veneno deixadas para os ratos, ou comiam os ratos, que por estarem envenenados eram caçados com facilidade. Sinto muito, disse Damares.
O imenso moedor está triturando animais mortos recolhidos nas estradas. Tanto o barulho do motor quanto dos ossos sendo esmagados ricocheteiam nas paredes altas do galpão. A mistura de som e fedor enfurece os sentidos. Edgar Wilson deixa o carrinho no lugar delimitado por um retângulo pintado no chão e sobe os degraus de uma escadinha de alumínio que dá acesso à caçamba do moedor, de onde é possível ver o lado de dentro. Consegue ver o que é? Grita um funcionário afastando o protetor auditivo. Não estou vendo nada, grita de volta Edgar Wilson. Desde cedo tá assim, agarrando. Mas não estou vendo nada.
Sobre o autoritarismo brasileiro. Lilia Moritz Schwartz. Demorei aqui Escravidão e racismo. No Brasil, o sistema escravocrata transformou-se num modelo tão enraizado que acabou se convertendo numa linguagem com graves consequências. Graçou por aqui, do século XVI ao XIX, uma escandalosa injustiça amparada pela artimanha da legalidade. Como não havia nada em nossa legislação que vetasse ou regulasse tal sistema, ele se espraiou por todo o país, entrando firme nos costumes da terra. Imperou no nosso território uma grande bastardia jurídica, a total falta de direitos de alguns ante a imensa concentração de poderes nas mãos de outros. Fim.
Se alguém for um espírito guardião, mandado pela primeira vez para habitar um hospedeiro que veio ao mundo em Umoniá, uma cidade na terra dos grandes pais, a primeira coisa a surpreender o espírito seria a imensidão da terra. Quando o espírito guardião desce, com o corpo reencarnado do novo hospedeiro em direção à terra, o que se revela ao olho é assombroso. Subitamente, como se alguma cortina primordial fosse aberta, estamos expostos a uma extensão de vegetação verde e luxuriante.
Quando retirei a faca da mala de roupas, embrulhada em um pedaço de tecido antigo e encardido, com nódoas escuras e um nó no meio, tinha pouco mais de 7 anos. Minha irmã, Belonísia, que estava comigo, era mais nova há 1 ano. Pouco antes daquele evento, estávamos no terreiro da casa antiga brincando com bonecas feitas de espiga de milho colhidas na semana anterior. Aproveitávamos as palhas que já amarelavam para vestir feito roupas nos sabugos. Falávamos que as bonecas eram as nossas filhas, filhas de Bibiana e Belonísia.
um apartamento em Urano. Em termos biológicos, afirmar que são necessários um homem e uma mulher para levar a cabo um processo de reprodução sexual é tão ridículo quanto eram, em outros tempos, as afirmações de que a reprodução só aconteceria entre dois corpos que partilhassem a mesma religião, o mesmo sangue, a mesma cor de pele ou o mesmo status social.
Da mesma maneira que, enquanto estamos presos, não cremos na vida livre, que não podemos esquecer. Uma vez soltos, esquecemos a coerência interna da vida na prisão, de cuja realidade, no entanto, não duvidamos. Hoje sei que saí, venho saindo da prisão como quem sai de um sonho. Ao passo que, enquanto preso, eu julgava que Santo Amaro, o solar da fossa e a TV Record é que tinham sido um sonho do qual não era possível sair.
Às vezes você fazia um pensamento e morava nele, afastava-se. Construiu uma casa assim, longínqua, dentro de mim. Era esse o seu modo de lidar com as coisas. Hoje, prefiro pensar que você partiu para regressar a mim e não queria apenas a sua ausência como legado. Eu queria um tipo de presença, ainda que dolorida e triste. E apesar de tudo, nesta casa, nesse apartamento, você será sempre o corpo que não vai parar de morrer. Será sempre o pai que se recusa a partir.
Quando o menino tinha 4 anos, ele perguntou ao pai por que as pessoas precisavam dormir. O pai respondeu: para que Deus conseguisse desfuder tudo que eles fuderam. Quando o menino tinha 12, ele perguntou à mãe por que o pai tinha ido embora de casa. A mãe disse: para poder fuder com tudo que passar pela frente. Quando o menino tinha 13, ele quis saber por que o pai tinha voltado para casa. A mãe respondeu: eu tenho 41, eu não estou afim de ficar procurando alguém para fuder. Aos 14, quando os palavrões pareciam jorrar da boca dos amigos feito água num cano furado, a palavra foda não exercia nenhum fascínio sobre o garoto. Nenhum pingo.
Firme, não suporto o chão de seus fundamentos. Tô de saco cheio de chamar tua imprudência de lei. Cada noite conto meus irmãos, e pela manhã, quando alguns não sobrevivem para serem contados, conto as covas que deixaram. Estendo a mão ao povo preto e toco apenas o ar, seu truque de mestre, América. Ora ele respira, ora não. Abra cadáver, macumba para turista, feitiço que alega não praticar. Dá logo uma pistola ao meu primo para fazer o trampo por vocês. Eu tentei, gente branca. Tentei, branquelos, mas passaram o funeral do meu mano fazendo planos para um cafezinho, falando alto demais ao lado de seus ossos.
Ama está andando pelo passeio do canal que divide a cidade. Algumas barcaças navegando lentamente nas primeiras horas da manhã. À esquerda está a passarela de inspiração náutica com tábuas estilo convés e torres tipo mastros. À direita está a curva do rio que se volta para o leste depois da ponte Waterloo, em direção ao dono de Catedral St. Paul. Ela sente o sol começar a se erguer. No ar, ainda uma brisa antes de a cidade ficar entupida de calor e fumaça. Uma violonista toca alguma coisa devidamente inspiradora mais adiante no passeio. A peça de Ama, a última amazona do reino de Daomé, estreia no Teatro Nacional essa noite.
Chegou um ponto em que os habitantes de Marte não podiam mais negar o aquecimento do seu planeta ou a escala da destruição que estava por vir. Em uma última tentativa desesperada de preservar sua civilização, eles construíram vastos canais conectando os polos do planeta à grande extensão de terra arrasada que cobriu o resto da superfície. O degelo anual das camadas de gelo polares produziria a água necessária para o cultivo de alimentos suficiente para a sobrevivência de pelo menos mais uma geração.
Educação indígena. A educação na aldeia indígena começa desde a primeira idade. Não segue os padrões de sala de aula. É um aprender sem pressa na solidariedade. Aprende que a agitação da formiga e o canto do sapo indicam que a chuva vem aí. Aprende a apreciar desde pequeno um bom peixe assado com vinho de açaí. Aprende que na arte de pescar só se pesca o que vai precisar. E a calma é importante para a flecha no peixe acertar. Aprende com os mais velhos, nossa memória viva, com os espíritos conversar e deles a permissão receber para na mata entrar.
Eu não tinha porra nenhuma pra fazer lá. Quer dizer, por que será que moro com a minha ex-namorada, sua nova namorada e a ex-namorada dela? Como é que alguém pode se sentir bem assim? Eu poderia estar escrevendo essa história de uma cela de cadeia. Engraçado, né? Ted e Alice, antes da minha partida, disseram: nada é tão ruim que não possa piorar ele. Eu não sabia mais o que fazer. Peguei um voo sim, eu fiz isso. Pra Portland. E a Julie e a Chris me buscaram no aeroporto. Eu estava muito doidona no avião.
Encontrei ela ali, hoje de manhã, de barriga para cima. Revelou Dona Elodia, indicando um ponto na praia onde se juntava o lixo que o mar trazia ou desenterrava. Troncos, sacolas plásticas, garrafas. Envenenada? Acho que sim. O que fizeram com ela? Enterraram? Dona Elodia fez que sim com a cabeça e disse, meus netos. Lá em cima, no cemitério? Não, aqui mesmo, na praia. Muitos cães do povoado morriam envenenados. Havia quem dissesse que eram mortos de propósito, mas Damares não podia acreditar que existissem pessoas capazes de fazer algo assim e achava que os cachorros comiam por engano as iscas com veneno deixadas para os ratos, ou comiam os ratos, que por estarem envenenados eram caçados com facilidade. Sinto muito, disse Damares.
O imenso moedor está triturando animais mortos recolhidos nas estradas. Tanto o barulho do motor quanto dos ossos sendo esmagados ricocheteiam nas paredes altas do galpão. A mistura de som e fedor enfurece os sentidos. Edgar Wilson deixa o carrinho no lugar delimitado por um retângulo pintado no chão e sobe os degraus de uma escadinha de alumínio que dá acesso à caçamba do moedor, de onde é possível ver o lado de dentro. Consegue ver o que é? Grita um funcionário afastando o protetor auditivo. Não estou vendo nada, grita de volta Edgar Wilson. Desde cedo tá assim, agarrando. Mas não estou vendo nada.
Sobre o autoritarismo brasileiro. Lilia Moritz Schwartz. Demorei aqui, Escravidão e racismo. No Brasil, o sistema escravocrata transformou-se num modelo tão enraizado que acabou se convertendo numa linguagem com graves consequências. Graçou por aqui, do século XVI ao XIX, uma escandalosa injustiça amparada pela artimanha da legalidade. Como não havia nada em nossa legislação que vetasse ou regulasse tal sistema, ele se espraiou por todo o país, entrando firme nos costumes da terra. Imperou no nosso território uma grande bastardia jurídica, a total falta de direitos de alguns ante a imensa concentração de poderes nas mãos de outros. Fim.
Se alguém for um espírito guardião, mandado pela primeira vez para habitar um hospedeiro que veio ao mundo em Umoniá, uma cidade na terra dos grandes pais, a primeira coisa a surpreender o espírito seria a imensidão da terra. Quando o espírito guardião desce, com o corpo reencarnado do novo hospedeiro em direção à terra, o que se revela ao olho é assombroso. Subitamente, como se alguma cortina primordial fosse aberta, estamos expostos a uma extensão de vegetação verde e luxuriante.
Quando retirei a faca da mala de roupas, embrulhada em um pedaço de tecido antigo e encardido, com nódoas escuras e um nó no meio, tinha pouco mais de 7 anos. Minha irmã, Belonísia, que estava comigo, era mais nova há 1 ano. Pouco antes daquele evento, estávamos no terreiro da casa antiga, brincando com bonecas feitas de espiga de milho, colhidas na semana anterior. Aproveitávamos as palhas que já amarelavam para vestir feito roupas nos sabugos. Falávamos que as bonecas eram as nossas filhas, filhas de Bibiana e Belonísia.
um apartamento em Urano. Em termos biológicos, afirmar que são necessários um homem e uma mulher para levar a cabo um processo de reprodução sexual é tão ridículo quanto eram, em outros tempos, as afirmações de que a reprodução só aconteceria entre dois corpos que partilhassem a mesma religião, o mesmo sangue, a mesma cor de pele ou o mesmo status social.
Da mesma maneira que, enquanto estamos presos, não cremos na
Passeole me dá vontade de rir. Me lembro daquela tarde que nós queria fugir. Toda tarde me lembro daquela tarde. Balanceia na ciranda, eu quero balancear. Na ciranda eu quero balancear. Meu encontro com a ciranda é bom.
So when I started knowing ciranda, it's a type of circle dance in Brazil since I was a child, and then in '94, I was always following the ciranda players. Some were dying at the time, and then I prepared a ciranda group in the Festa do Divino, a popular Brazilian religious party, and among the so-called caiçaras, a native population. And then in '94, we were a big success, especially in Rio, the whole idea of ciranda, which is a type of circle dance. But children didn't want to know about ciranda, but I was invited to, in the Festa do Divino, prepare a circle dance. I decided to play, and I had never played it before. And all of those who were there with us, they had never played ciranda music. And then we went on stage.
Eu quero balancear. Eu recebi 2 elogios já.
And then, two people came to compliment me. One was from a friend of mine, a professor, and she said there are 2 moments of ciranda, before me and after me. Because we would dance, but we didn't know what the musicians would sing because they sometimes would mumble and we couldn't understand the lyrics. But then once I prepared my group, they started understanding the verses, the lyrics. They would sing like instead of you really pronouncing the words. And then I started saying, I would sing it and pronounce the words correctly. So people started to understand the verses. And then they started to like and understand ciranda, circle dance. But it was maybe a culture from the elders, so to speak. And I've part of flip since the very beginning. I play, I do theater, dances. I have a dance group, a folklore dance, typical dances, and ciranda, which is what I love, I guess. And I maybe played in, if I didn't play maybe 3 times at Flip, it was, I can't remember. Ministry of Tourism and Associação Casa Azul presents the 18th Flip, International Literary Festival of Paraty. The project has the support of the federal incentive Vale Mais and with the sponsorship of Itaú Bank. With the support of the municipality of Paraty, Pinheiro Neto and Associates, and UOL. It is prepared by Casa Azul, Special Secretary of Culture, Ministry of Tourism, and the Federal Republic of Brazil.
Esta mesa é ao vivo.
This roundtable is live. Questions might be addressed to the authors throughout our broadcasting through our chat box on the YouTube channel. At the end of this meeting, some of these questions will be addressed to our authors. Have a great flip. Hello, good afternoon, good evening Paraty, good evening to all of you. I am Ángel Gurría-Quintana. I'm a journalist, I'm a translator, an editor. I work at the University of Cambridge in the UK. And it is a pleasure to introduce this roundtable called Ancestry. And we have with us two amazing authors. This is the 7th roundtable for the virtual Flip 2020. And it is a pleasure to be here with you. The first of our authors is Chigozie Obioma. He was born in Nigeria. He graduated in Cyprus, and now he lives in the US, where he teaches African literature, creative writing at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. His first novel, The Fisherman, was shortlisted for the 2015 Booker Prize in the UK. His second novel, An Orchestra of Minorities, was also shortlisted for Booker Prize last year. And this is the book that is being now edited in Brazil by Globo Livros.
So welcome, Chigozie. It's very good to have you with us. And I understand you are in Nebraska, right in the middle of the American Midwest.
Yes, such a pleasure to be here. I love Brazil so much. In fact, I like to say that it was a mistake that I was born in Nigeria. I should have been born in Brazil. But this is a joke that my mom and my dad would not love. But there is some truth to that. Yeah. So I currently live in the very center of America. You know, this place is funny because my friends, which means people who are in culture and very highly educated, say that this is a flyover country. So nobody is supposed to land here. You're supposed to just fly above the place. So it is, you know, I'm one of those strange people who has landed in Nebraska.
It's very good to have you. And we'll get back to your book in a moment. A semana pasada.
Last week, the Jabuti Award, Best Novel of the Year, was won by the novel Torto Arado, in a free translation, A Crooked Plow, published by Todavia. This first novel was already awarded with the Leia Award in Portugal. And also he has a collection of essays, A Oração do Carrasco, published in 2017, was also shortlisted for the Jabuti Award in essays, or short stories, sorry. He was born in Salvador, where he lives today. He graduated in geography in the Federal University of Bahia. Also, at the Federal University, he has a PhD in ethnic studies and African studies, studying the creation of quilombola, or maroon communities inland of the Northeast. Itamar is pretty busy because he won the Jabuti Prize. So it's wonderful to have him here with us at Flip. Congratulations for your award, Itamar. Congratulations for your novel, and welcome. Good evening, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here in this conversation with the two of you, with Ángel and Obioma, to talk about ancestry. Thank you, Itamar. So let's start. I would like to first ask Chigozie.
Your novel to readers who are not yet familiar with it. Could you set the scene for us and describe it briefly?
So I like to say that An Orchestra of Minorities is a novel primarily about a young poultry farmer who is supposed to be poor. He lives alone. His two parents have died. And so he's trying to like pick himself up. And then he encounters this woman who is trying to throw herself off the bridge, and they develop some kind of connection. So that's one part of what the novel is about. The second thing is that the novel is narrated by a Chi, which in the spirituality of the cosmology of the Igbo people of West Africa in Nigeria, just, you know about the Brazilian, the Yoruba, mythology. This is the Igbo mythology, who are neighbors to the Yoruba. It is believed that everybody is ensouled by a Chi, a guardian spirit that lives in you before even you were born, and then stays through the course of your life. So it is this Chi who tells this story. So it's also about the story of the Chi and its quest for reincarnation. So the story is mostly two-dimensional, you might say.
And it follows the protagonist on a journey which takes him beyond Nigeria.
Absolutely. So I just talked about how Chinonso, the main character, falls in love with this woman, but he finds out that she is way above him, and she is in a class to which he cannot ascend. So what he does is, in trying to flip this class difference, he travels to Cyprus. So this, in fact, is a tragic journey, because there he encounters a horrible kind of racism. He is accused of having, molested a woman, and this is all made up. By the way, that part of the story was a true life story of an experience I witnessed, having lived in Cyprus. And so on coming back to Nigeria, he tries to reconnect with this woman after having spent time in incarceration back in Cyprus. So the second half of the novel then becomes a kind of the first part is a journey away from her to get back to her. Then the second part becomes a journey to reconnect with her. So a two-way journey right there.
Thank you. We'll come back to Orchestra of Minorities in a moment. I'd like to ask Itamar to introduce his novel. Itamar, entendo que você...
So Itamar, I understand that you started writing Torto Arado, Crooked Plow, when you were only 16, is that correct? Yes, yes. Torto Arado, it's an old story, the story that followed me for many years. And I was changing it in time. And the story changed in time. I was deeply influenced by novels which are part of the Brazilian literature, traditional literature, especially the 30s and the 40s generation, that had a more social connection, a very strong social connection, which would specifically talk about the region where I live in the northeast of Brazil. And I didn't have any experience. I didn't have the maturity to write that story. So I abandoned it. I left it behind a little bit. But a couple of years later, I decided to revisit it because I started working in the field. I was born in the city. So I didn't have direct contact with stories of rural areas. Only my grandparents would tell me about these stories of rural settings. But I had never lived or worked or traveled into these rural areas. So I started traveling frequently For almost 15 years, I've been doing that. And then I found out another country, a diversity. I found out so many things, so many hidden stories that I decided to bring the story to life. And this is where I revisited this will of writing Torto Arado, Crooked Plow. And the story behind Crooked Plow narrates a saga of the heirs to the African diaspora who still today live around many regions in our country. In the specific case in my novel, they live in the Chapada Diamantina region, inland Bahia, but they live around the country. And in vulnerable conditions, extreme vulnerability, with, of course, agrarian conflicts, land issues. And this is the story behind the novel, but it's narrated based on two sisters that have an accent right in the beginning of the story. And they will follow different paths in their struggle, trying to fight for their land title, something that will perpass all the story of Torto Arado. And I would like to ask, there is one central element in Torto Arado, which is the inclusion of different languages. There is a language of the Umbanda religion, but also the language of the name of the trees, something that is in the backlands of Brazil, the name of the animals, the trees. So it's a mixture of different languages. So I wanted to ask you, Itamar, how are you able to find this balance between the different languages that are part of your novel? Well, I lived for years and years with people who live in rural areas, producers, traditional communities. I was able to take a deep dive in this different way of speaking, a country that is so diverse from north to south. We do not speak the same language. We speak different languages. We have different Portuguese languages, and these different languages will trickle throughout different experiences. For instance, in our language, we have many words that have different origins, that have sometimes origins in the native population of African ethnicity that we were talking about here today, with the Yorubas, the Ishis, the Bantu, and many other groups, ethnic groups that came or were brought to Brazil. And I was immersed in this orality, in this way of communicating for many years, due to my work and my research also. In my academic research, I recorded sometimes these conversations. And when I would come back to my house in a city, I would always, transcribe them. And there I would find this different pace, this different rhythm, these very specific words, and even different syntax. So this is something that I saw in that material, a possibility, a stylistic possibility, an amazing possibility that would give me the opportunity of writing a novel, something that would come close to the same language, but at the same time wouldn't be hermetic, wouldn't be closed in itself, something that could be accessible to my readers.
Chigozie, this is something that is absolutely essential to your novel as well. There is a huge amount of code switching. People speak many languages, and the languages they choose to communicate in tell us, they reveal a lot about them. So whether it's Igbo or Yoruba or English. So the same question I asked Itamar, how did you go about the process of balancing the way in which you use different languages to tell these stories?
It is, in fact, a kind of imperative, being a writer who is writing from a post-colonial tradition. So I like to joke that once you are born into a place like Nigeria, almost instantly, at least in my case, for instance, you are bilingual at the very least. And I happen to have been trilingual. So for a child who is bequeathed with these various gifts, and these are monstrosities in themselves. Because a language is not just something that is ordinary. No, it's not. It is a kind of an archipelago of a lot of things. It constitutes the culture, the religion, almost everything of a particular people. So and you have three of them. So what do you do with them? What ends up happening is that you compartmentalize, even if unconsciously, you are ascribing particular, function to a particular language. So I write about that in The Fishermen, especially where the boys, switch to English when they speak to foreigners, and then they speak Igbo in the house and whatnot. So as a writer as well, this is what I find myself doing, because it is a reality of my characters. They live in this reality. But also in an orchestra of minorities, because of how I have chosen to tell the story by a reincarnating spirit who transcends time, who is in fact has lived through about 700 centuries, really, because the chi keeps coming and going. So it is in itself a repertoire of knowledge, of history. It is a kind of cosmic being that has regenerated again and again and acquires, different languages, as Itamar just spoke. So it's like a diverse worlds within itself. So when the cheese is telling the story, there are different registers of discourse and languages that it goes into. And when it is, for instance, addressing other spirits, the language is elevated, it is ornate, it is grandiose. When it is speaking about Chinonso, or even trying to communicate with the host, the language is a little bit pared down. So there are, in fact, channels of languages that are flowing throughout the novel.
Itamar spoke a moment ago about oral traditions, and both your novels seem to be quite rooted in oral traditions of storytelling. I read something you wrote, Chigozie, in an interview where you said that an ideal novel needs to have a beginning and an end that can be told orally. Why is that?
Well, sometimes it's like there are two Chigozies, because somebody quotes something I've said before and I can't even remember. But I think that the place of orality, especially in the kind of fiction I write, and I think in Itamar's as well, where they're like spirits, and the third part of his novel is narrated by a spirit, almost like the chi of an orchestra of minorities. You can see that the metafictional dimensionality that these stories assume do not necessarily lend themselves to the written form. I think this is what makes it different. Makes my writing, for instance, even my prose, my use of English, which is obviously what I compose in, different from an American's prose, or someone who is writing in Britain, because the language then has a direct connection to the world view that you are reflecting in the novel. So, and my novel, An Orchestra of Minorities, actually is an orally rendered story. I think that I see myself as this transcriptor of what is being actually orally told. So why did I tell this story in this way? Well, because growing up, I saw how some of the most interesting stories were told. So the Chi tells the story. That the entire story is a confession. It's a kind of a testimony before this jury in the Igbo idea of heaven, or the space above. So this was how stories were told back in pre-colonial times and even into the early part of the 20th century. So if somebody has been accused of having committed some kind of crime, they swore before a deity and then made some ritual. And then before the entire village or townspeople, they are trying to confess their sin or what they've been accused of. So the story that is told there is something obviously that is being told orally, but it takes a lot of detour. There's a lot of gymnastics. There's a lot of turning around, a lot of non-linearity that comes in, that, you know, a lot of embellishments even, and lying and all kinds of pomposities that you will not see in a kind of direct format prose. So I would say that this is you know, the function of orality in my writing as a whole.
Itamar, qual foi para você o desafio de
Itamar, what was the challenge for working with this oral culture of the hinterlands of the Northeast? I think that the challenge was not so much a challenge, a huge challenge, since I always positioned myself, I wanted to narrate that story based on their own perspective. So telling it from the perspective of the characters, which have a different life from mine, but they were, it was a field, an area which I had studied for years, and I succeeded in shifting myself to make this shift into that place, into their place, always having in mind that I wanted to tell the story from that perspective. So oftentimes I took paths to tell and narrate things which for us who live in the city, who have had formal schooling at the university, who have traveled to other places, it might sound like magic, but what I see and I feel this harmony with what Obioma is saying and telling concerning his characters is that there is an entire world view or cosmovision of the way of viewing the world, a proper form of facing the world and internalizing the world. But going back to the challenge that you mentioned, it was not so challenging because I already been immersed in that daily life, in those ways of life. And what I wanted in my literary work, what I wanted to do was to write in such a way that the writing would be accessible. I would like to mimic the speech of the workers or transcribe them literally, the way that they told stories and how they narrated their stories. I wanted this to be a literary text which had my hand in it to recreate a world, its own world, and accessible to readers. I think that my main concern was that. It was to recreate the world, a world that could be read anywhere, that could be understood anywhere. That's where this work enters with the language, with this literary doing, to treat write in a literary way to reach people regardless of their origins or their ambience that they have with that reality. Chigozie referred to one of the interesting choices in his novel, which was to have as one of the narrators of the book a spirit, enchanted spirit. Maybe you could explain what jare, who are the enchanted beings, and why did you choose to tell part of the story through these spirits, which is in the book in Obioma told by Chi in the case of the crooked plow, Santa Rita Pescadeira, which is one of these syncretic figures of the worshiping grounds for the African Brazilian religion. Jare is a religion which only exists in the region where the novel takes place, where it's set, which is called Chapada Diamantina, a former diamond mining area. Jare is a convergence of beliefs because this region of Chapada Diamantina was occupied in the 19th century very intensely with the discovery of diamonds there. There was a diamond lode, so a lot of enslaved workers were taken from the Bahia, Salvador, where they practiced to a major extent the African descendant religions, and candomblé especially, and also enslaved workers from the Minas Gerais, where they already had experience with mining, gems and other kinds of mines. But these workers took Catholicism with them. The Catholic, they'd already been converted to Catholicism, and they had Catholicism as well. So the convergence of these workers in a region which is inhabited by indigenous peoples as well created the possibility of forming Jare. Jare has elements from the Catholic beliefs, Christian beliefs, elements from the African descendant religions, and there's this aspect, very specific characteristic and proper to this area from the solidarity, horizontal solidarity. It's a kind of solidarity which traverses the entire community. And the shaman as a leader, spiritual leader, the healer, who treats the body and spirits based on his ancestral knowledge, the knowledge of medicinal herbs and spells and prayers. And Jade has a pantheon of gods. They're the enchanted beings called caboclos in Portuguese. They have two different forms. The word enchanted in Portuguese, it's more literary. It sounds rather beautiful. It talks about enchantment. That's what I felt when I became familiar with the Jare religion. Hence came the idea, after having written the first two parts, the narrated part, narrated by the sisters, and throughout their lives until they came of age and their background in Agua Negra, the ranch where they lived, I felt the need to to make a bridge between their lives and the past, of those two sisters and the past. That's where I got the idea of Santa Rita Pescadeira, this deity had already appeared in the Jade ceremony. I got the idea of giving her a leading role for her to make this bridge to the past. So she narrates, she tells the story as a character, as like Chi in Obioma's novel, there's no beginning and then no end. It is, she could live an entire process of diaspora, the cruelty of slavery, everything that took place here in Brazil, things that the sisters hadn't experienced themselves. And the reader needed to become familiar with that, because this sad memory of this period, this dark period of Brazil's history, oftentimes is not passed down from one generation to the next. We learn about this either through historical documents or through literature and fiction and nonfiction, but it wasn't normally told from one generation to the next. And Santa Rita Pescadeira has this role. She makes this bridge to the past, in addition to being a character who, for me, was very special, because throughout my experience in this area, in the diamond mining area, I heard people talking about Santa Rita, but nobody embodied her. The last people who embodied this spirit, Santa Rita Pescadeira, had died already. So they knew nothing about her, how she used to dance and how she sung, how she acted in the ceremony, in her celebration. This character kind of empty, and that void for me was essential for to give to lend to my literary creation, recreating the world and recreating lives. And I imagined how she danced, how it meant to be a saint who has a very strong connection to the rivers. It's a river with it's an area with no sea. I imagined her dancing as if she were a river. I imagined her casting a fishing net. She's the Santa Rita fisherwoman. She has a fishing net, with the imaginary fishing net. She fishes the misfortune of those people. It was very important for me, and I think that she is able to make this bridge in the history that's narrated, a reality of servitude, which is still very close to modern days. In the 21st century, even, it's very contemporary in that sense, but she makes a bridge to the past, which is the past of these heirs of the diaspora, a past which oftentimes is denied and covered up, and we need to reimagine it, this ancestrality. Thank you, Itamar.
To tell us about the narrator of your novel, Chi, the spirit presence. And I wonder, it sounds like you might have had a lot of fun having this spirit presence as a narrator, because he has the knowledge of many lives to draw from. He can almost see what happens in the future. And so from a narrative point of view, he sounds like a fascinating character to work with. What was that like?
Well, you know that what I've been thinking recently, because I've been hard at work at a new novel, and I discovered that I'm a student of the craft, and with every encounter with the page, I'm rethinking things. I'm learning new things, and I think that writing as a whole, at least for me now, is an exercise in journeying into the very core, the soul or the heart of language, you might say, and then trying to bridge as much as possible the differences, or eliminate even the distance, let's say, between language and thought. So there is thought and there's language, and they are wide apart. And the act of writing, of composition, of fiction, for me, is trying to bridge that distance to the extent that at the end of the day, there's a union, a marriage of both thought and language. And that is fiction, that is writing. So in that sense, I had this grandiose vision, obviously, that is the thought, the vision, that I wanted to create a cosmological novel for Africa. Because, I look at our, all these various traditions from which Candomblé comes from. Candomblé, I don't know if I'm saying the name correctly, but it's a fusion of Angolan, if I remember correctly, Yoruba, as well as I think Congolese spiritualities into one, you see. So we have all these cosmologies, but there hasn't been a major cosmological novel in any of these traditions, as you would, something comparable to, say, The Inferno by Dante, which is an exploration of the Judeo-Christian mythology around the afterlife, around Hades. Even prior to that, you see in the works of the classical Greek writers and Roman writers, they've done many of these things, Homer, for instance. And then you talk of in the, I think, 16th century or 15th century, people like Milton, with Paradise Lost. And the tradition continues. Then you go to India, you see like a variety of cosmological novels. So I decided that I'm going to fill that gap. That is what I say, that I'm doing the dirty job of African literature. That stuff where nobody wants to go to, I will go there. So I mean, it's a joke. I'm not trying to feel like I'm doing anything extraordinary, but that was the feeling, at least. So I decided to look at the Igbo, religion. One of the reasons why I did that was because, as many other religions in the West African tradition, it is extraordinarily persecuted In fact, I would say, I don't have the statistics, but people in Bahia region of Brazil probably know more about Shango and Orisha more than the people in Yoruba land in Nigeria. Really, if you take the statistics, I mean, part of that is because Christianity and Islam basically, were scorched-egged in the way in which they swept through Africa. Islam was much more ruthless, in its territorial sweep. But both of them were incendiary in the way in which they cannibalized totally the religions of these people. So, but the Yoruba, because of that connection to Cuba, to Brazil, and the international angle that it had, still is somewhat more maintained. The Igbo religion is almost dead, So I wanted to write a novel that would monumentalize that, so that if you wanted to go back 5 years from now and you want to understand the Chi, which is the beam, it's the central structure of the Igbo religion and worldview and cosmology, you will, pick up my novel, and that would be a good resource for you. So it wasn't. So what it meant was that I had to read everything that had been written about this. I had to interview people, go to the shrine, and so the task of doing that kind of research was arduous. It was endless. But the result, I think, putting it into a kind of a cohesive narrative around the story of this one guy, I think is something that I was satisfied with.
You mentioned just now the classics and sort of going back to Greek mythology. Reading your book, one thing that struck me, in fact, reading your book alongside Itamar's, was the weight of prophecy and how you both use prophecy as a narrative device. It's very clear in your first novel, Chigozie, in The Fisherman, but there are elements of that also in The Orchestra of Minorities. So I'd like to ask you and then Itamar about the use of prophecy as a storytelling tool.
Well, I see there's a kind of a prologue to my answer. It is that human beings of any tradition, of any time, really, are always curious about the future. What, que sera, sera, it's a Nigerian rhyme that we have. What will I be? What is going to happen? What is going to become of this novel that I'm writing now? How will it be received? How many people are going to buy Itamar's book now that is the king of fiction in Brazil, and whatnot. But what is funny about that quest for the future is that the future really, so life itself is mobility, but it is a kind of mobility that is right now, as we are here, we are moving, we are in transition, things are happening, but it's a reluctant mobility. It's a mobility that is deceptive. We are not seeing it. We're not necessarily conscious of the speed to which it is. It's like plants. Trees are moving, but you don't understand that they are. But there's mobility. It feels like it's a fixed kind of mobility, but it is in fact in transition. It is in movement. So this is to say that the future itself, it's a search for the self that is not yet here. So it's as if there is a dual version of myself and I'm chasing after it and I'm running, I'm trying to catch it. So this is to say that prophecy really is people just being reluctant, being anxious to discover that self quicker than it will be discovered. So this is how you see, people wanting predictions or prophecies. So it's a big thing in Nigeria. In fact, earlier this year, my dad was like, he's a good Christian. He called me. He's like, I know this guy who wants to pray for you. He has seen certain things. I mean, he knows my views about some of these things. I'm not opposed to stuff like that. Like somebody saying that they've seen a vision about me, because I'm endlessly curious. I do not hold any particular view sacredly. I want to understand. I want my views to be challenged every single day. So I listened to what the guy had to say. Obviously, he has, he saw some visions. So it's something that we believe a lot, which was one of the reasons why I centered the fishermen around that. So this madman who is able to see the future, and I think that a lot of people have connected to the novel in Nigeria because of this. It's a very popular novel in Nigeria, and I think in many parts of Africa. But why I think is mostly because this is something that we hold sacred. We almost don't question the fact that some people can see the future, but really, is it true that people can see the future? Is it true that in fact the boys in the fishermen actually kill? If I'm giving this, if this is a spoiler, then you have to buy my book if you're listening now. So is it true that they kill each other because of the prophecy of the madman? Well, the question is open-ended. It could go either way. If you think about the fact that the boys themselves are the ones who do the act, so they have willed themselves into doing that. But also some people will tell you that, well, the madman said it will happen a particular way. He said there would be a river of blood. But at the scene of the confrontation where the prophecy is supposed to have been fulfilled, there is a river of blood. So what then can you say? Is the prophecy actually true? Did it come to pass? Or did we, just by our own choice and our own decisions, bring it to fruition? This I do not know the answer.
River of Blood, by the way, is also the title of the third section of Itamar's novel.
No kidding. He is my brother then. We have same spirit.
Combinamos antes da
Yes, it was all arranged among us before this. We arranged everything.
Itamar, falando
so now, Itamar, talking about the weight and the strength of the prophecy, of prophecies in general, and how you use it, and how you use prophecy as a narrative. There is a moment in Torto Arado where one of the spirits will, sort of send a message to one of the sisters. And this is something that will be in their destiny throughout. And she asks herself the same thing. She doesn't know if she should or not believe in that. But actually, this ends up, creating her destiny. So could you tell us a little bit about that, of how you work with this literary tool or resource? It's a difficult question to answer, Angel. I always write considering or thinking about the characters and what makes sense to them. Sometimes what makes sense to my characters is not what makes sense to me. And there, at that moment, in that atmosphere, within that farm where they were living, and in the different practices, the practices they had with their parents, that prophecy made sense. And I guess the prophecy itself will be a result of a realization of the reality in which they live, where they live, how they live, and all the sacrifices they went through, and all the struggle and many things that are like the guiding light, a guiding line inside their story. But more than the prophecy itself, I guess there's always this way of looking back into the past. I guess the definite prophecy is in the last sentence of my novel, and it is a realization that is very genuine that the survivors, regardless of us being, massacred by colonialism, like Obiama said, the whole story of colonialism, Christianism, Islamism, or Islam, will leave their religions behind, and leaving behind the truly ethnic religions of Nigeria and erase them. How this is that the survivors are the ones who are able to overcome all this, are the ones who are able to reach their destinies, the destinies that are, they're able to overcome destinies that are imposed on them. And I guess the last sentence of my novel is exactly in that sense, is that the true prophecy, maybe for the readers, maybe for as a observation for those who are there and do not believe in prophecies, that over our land, you will always have the survival of the strongest, the one who's actually able to survive and overcome all of their story, their destinations, their prophecies, so many destruction, the will to destroy that are launched upon us. Yes, I guess it's worthwhile maybe reading. It is a brutal ending, as an ending of a novel. I hope I'm not, I hope it's not a spoiler for the novel, but the last sentences, over the land, we will always have the strongest surviving. And this explains this conflict that happens throughout your novel. So now, let me ask you, Itamar, and maybe the questions for both of you. Itamar, to which extent do you feel part of a tradition of Northeastern writers and authors, or maybe novelists from the Brazilian backlands? Do you feel part of that tradition? Do you feel the weight of that tradition on your shoulders? Do you try to escape from it? I try not to think about that, Angel. That's the truth. Of course, it's a fact that I lived and was, I drank, so to speak, from this literature by my predecessors, these amazing authors. But my moment is a different moment than they lived. They were looking into the rural areas to a certain reality, and they were able to build their narratives inside that way they saw the Northeast, always narrating what they were seeing in a brutal manner, but it was human experience that they were confronted with. And I guess the way I write is, of course, a result of that, because I was also a reader of all these authors. But still, to me, I have this need of trying to connect myself to a even more remote past. Recently, I was reading Baldwin, and he was saying that he would feel when he migrated to France and started living with migrants, sorry, people who had came from the African countries to live, the French colonies to live in France, that they had a very consolidated, solid story, a past that was very clear and visible, that was part and passed from one generation to the next. And Baldwin would say that in America, this experience of the African diaspora, this link was lost. We're always trying to gather and collect and revisit, evidences of this experience that might connect us to that past. And Torto Arado, the crooked plow, tries to do this connection with the past, something that seems so distant but still so present. Because above all, it shows that what we're living today in Brazil, it has to do with what we're living in Brazil on the structural racism, social inequalities. They are not inequalities just because they are inequalities. They have an origin that will go beyond that will go beyond social studies. It has an origin that has to do with the origin itself of ancestry of these citizens, of these characters here in our country. So Baldwin used to say that he would envy when he went to France to find people from Senegal and so many other people who had come from Africa, and they kept within their own history, their own continuity. Our story was something that was interrupted and something that suffered a process of being erased throughout the years. And now, the moment we are living now, we are very attentive in terms of trying to revisit the story. And this is where literature has an important role to play because it is able to recreate worlds. It gives us the possibility of connecting and creating bonds and links between stories that seem to be independent, separated in time. And in Torto Arado, we try to find this narrative. It's a story about today's Brazil, but it tries to also show us that this Brazil, today's Brazil, is the result of a devastating past, of a colonial past, a past that lived a system, a labor system of exploitation that branded us and indelibly. So these issues are central to my work as an author. And maybe because of that, you are able to make this difference between the work these authors had, people I admire immensely, and I do believe that my novel is a result of these important works. It's not. I'm not saying that my book is as good as their books, but I'm saying that this, of course, reading these authors, I was inspired as an author and as a reader. Thank you, Tamar.
To ask you the same question, do you feel the weight of a tradition of Nigerian writers or African writers of the diaspora? You said once, I think, that you have been as influenced by Gabriel Garcia Marquez as you have been by Chinua Achebe, for instance.
I love the answers that Itamar gave. I think is really true. So the evocation of the ancestral link, to the stories that we are telling, even though it is contemporary times that we are obviously telling our stories. But I would add to that So there's a saying that John Berryman, used to say that the luckiest writers are those who have encountered something very bad and have survived those things. And so I think that I have, in that way, even though it was a painful past for me, but I have been through certain painful experiences that have made me somewhat lucky, so that I'm able to create these things almost independent of any tradition that I might obviously admire. For instance, as I've said in the past, I read obviously to become who I have come to be, and I think that I'm just starting. I've only written 2 books. If I write 5 and they win, prizes, I make $1 million and whatnot. I build mansions. Then I would say that I've arrived. So, but then, so I read these books. Marquez's work, for instance. The dualism, the way in which realities are subverted, or even made into very interesting things. You can, what the Western critics have called magical realism. It's something that I find thoroughly fascinating. But then you go to Africa, works by Chinua Achebe, precursors like himself, or Wole Soyinka as well, kind of have a different form of realism to what they are doing. For instance, the prophecies again of the priestess in Things Fall Apart, and the pronouncements that are made, these are things that are, definitely you see echoes of that in my work. But I think that for me specifically, I am trying to create out of certain kinds of necessities. As I said just a while ago, I am trying, at least in these preliminary books, especially on occasional minorities, it is trying to fill some kind of gap that I think is needed in not just the literature of Nigeria, but in some ways of the African tradition. But also, I am also trying to understand personally why some of the things that I've experienced have happened to me. Just a week or so ago, I released an essay, about this repressive school that I went to when I was 18 or 19 years old, and it was such that I was traumatized. After 2 years of being in this place, it was a Catholic school, and you couldn't go out. We had Soviet style spies everywhere and whatnot, and so how can that kind of structure exist in a modern country like Nigeria? So trying to understand where I am, who I am as a human being, what the time in which I'm living, and of course the past, as Itamar said, that have shaped what my realities today are. This is what I'm writing about. This is what the fisherman with the stories of prophecies and whatnot is trying to understand, a kind of understanding of life.
Thank you. We have some questions from people watching this conversation. Lucia Caetano has asked Chigozie, apart from the prophecies in The Fisherman, the book also has as background a series of military coups in Nigeria. I think politics is touched on also tangentially in Orchestra of Minorities. So the question is how the book was received in Nigeria, given the political content of it.
Well, Nigeria, I'll say that there are two dimensions to that question, and thank you for reading, by the way. The first component to the question is, I have to say that The Fisherman has been quite popular in Nigeria. It's a book that quite a number of people have read, and I'm grateful for that, because I was very afraid when I was writing this book about how it would be received, this raving lunatic going about and saying these things. But for the political aspects of it, I think that more often than not, people see it as a kind of true representation of that period in Nigeria. A lot of people will tell you this, and I think I might be one of them, that Nigeria would have become a more successful country than it is now if the 1993 election was not annulled. So think about what is going on in America today. Let's say, there's been scenarios. In fact, just yesterday, a friend of mine told me that one of Donald Trump's advisors has advised him to declare martial law and then get the military to overrule the election and redo it because of the mail-in ballots that swayed the election for his opponent. So think about that kind of reality. where, in the Nigerian story, the free election was annulled because the guy who was president did not like the outcome of the election. He wasn't even running, but his best friend was the one running. So setting the story of the fishermen in 1993, 94, was a strategic thing, because I wanted to bring back the memory of what we lost. Because after that time, there were a lot of coups that happened, and a lot of people have tried to set Nigeria back on course. And it's just a ship that seemed to have been damaged a lot, that it keeps floundering and sinking, to what it is today.
Thank you. Itamar.
So now, Itamar, we have a question here that you might have already answered from André Mendes. And he asks you to talk a little bit about the process of how you write the chapters and where the standpoint of it was from one of the enchanters. You already talked about this, and then he congratulates you, he compliments you on your book. So I guess you already answered a little bit of this question, but I might add to this. What was your reaction to what Chigozie was saying just now? In Torto Arado, The Crooked Plow, it isn't a political novel, but still, it's strongly political because the inequalities, violence are there. So, yeah, it is strongly political because we are political beings. So it would be an illusion to believe that we wouldn't be able to write from that standpoint, from that perspective. Writing reflects much of what we think and what we imagine. And that's why it sounds political. And I'm glad that this is how my book is seen and read. I guess this political dimension is part of our existence. It's part of who we are. It constitutes who we are as thinking, living beings that move around in this world and for so long. It's not something recent to us. And so to me, it was quite by chance until that this happened, because this book came to me at a moment that we were living a great change, political change in Brazil. And so central issues that were central at the time, such as agrarian reform, to traditional communities, the quilombola or maroon communities, land titles, and this have almost disappeared. We have no longer seen this happening. So if this is a book, a novel that talks about this tragedy of our land rights that will just perpetuate inequalities in Brazil, it makes sense that this concern came to me as I wrote my book. But it is also a reflection of the political setting of our country. I wrote it before, but this is a constant concern, something that will accompany me for many years. So this, of course, is even more prevalent now in this moment of our history. And I see that in literature, we are also able to anticipate some things in time. We're able to predict a couple of things, or maybe bring in topics that are sometimes hidden in the memory of society in general. And then we bring it to light to show its relevance. And this is how I see this writing. And this is why I have the political hue, and not by chance it is there. I doubt it very much that any author, even an author that might choose not to participate in politics and who thinks he's writing outside of politics, isn't also inserted and contributing with their own report, with their vision of the world, and a report of their own time. And if you write based on that place where you're at, of course, you are a political being. And politics will also be in what you write. So unfortunately, we are reaching the end of this roundtable, and I guess I asked so many questions already to our both authors. So maybe I would like to conclude this talk by asking if you have any questions to one another. Maybe you want to ask your colleague a question. So maybe if you have any curiosity between colleagues, so to speak, authors, fellow novelists, awarded novelists that you are.
To you first to ask whether there is anything that you would like to ask Itamar.
Well, there are always wonderful questions, a lot of questions to ask great writers. But maybe I would love to know what you think about dualism of the experiences, of your characters. So there are spirits. One of the short stories I read that is in the English language is, there's a lot of metaphysical dimension to it. Things are being said, things are being done that are not just by human beings. So how do you relate that to your everyday living? Do you believe this, or is it something that you write in your stories?
Itamar, você quer responder para Chigozie?
Would you like to answer to Chigozie, and then you can just start and ask your own question? So I will answer, and then I'll ask my question. So Chigozie, this is when I'm writing, it doesn't matter what I think or what I believe or my life. And I write always trying to put myself, changing my ego, changing myself and becoming the character. So before anything else, what matters is my characters believe in that, not me. And then I have to fit into their mold, into their characters. And since my approach is towards their experience, this diverse experience, and of characters that sometimes were in the margins of Brazilian literature, outsiders to the Brazilian literature, I try to shift as an author to write from their standpoint, from their point of view, from that character. So even though I might not believe, or if this experience is not part of my daily life, I do care if it is part of the life of my characters, and I am the one who have to fit into them. And once I believe in what the character tells me, I also have to allow my reader to believe in the same thing. And this is the greatest challenge in writing from this writing point. And so let me ask you a question, Obioma. Reading about an orchestra of minorities and this narrative from the Chi, I felt very close. And I even talked to Angel about this. We were talking earlier today, actually yesterday we were talking. And I felt this closeness, this proximity with the experience I reported earlier in terms of coming together to the cosmovision of my characters in order to narrate everyone or that whole world, that specific, unique world they live in. How do you, as a professor in Nebraska, an intellectual, an academic, someone who writes, how do you see this vision of a tradition that is sometimes lost in Nigeria? And how are you able to revisit this, to talk about things and create a narrative about human experience, which is what your book actually does?
Well, it is, as you say, coming from a place of deep interest. So as I've said before, I'm trying to fill gaps that I'm seeing, but also it is because I deeply care about these things. I remember I mean, I couldn't remember, but there's something that my mom always tells me that happened when I was very young. So we went to her village, and there was this stream, a kind of body of water that has been in existence for hundreds of years. And it's still there today, luckily. And it is called the White River in the English translation. So everybody is forbidden from fishing from the river. You cannot fish. If you fish from it by mistake, you have to return the fish. If it's dead, then you're in trouble. You have to make all kinds of absolutions, to the deities of this river. Else, deep misfortune would be, people die from doing that. And there are stories of people who have died. So it's a very deep belief that, they will warn you, even those who are Christians. This is a part of these people's culture that you don't play with. So I remember hearing a story like that. And there was this, so when I was a child, there was this big debate. The military governor of my state, where this village was, wanted, obviously he doesn't care about this belief. He wanted to turn that place into a dam. And, many people from the village were for it. They said, oh, this is modernity is coming to this village if this happens. But I remember crying, to my mom and saying, oh no, but what is going to happen to the fishes and that tradition? I was very sad about what was going to happen, but people were looking at me, this guy, is it that you don't like modernity or not, or not? But there was something about that connection to our ancestors, to the past, to the one thing that is still very African that I badly wanted to be maintained. Obviously, of course, I want clean water and whatnot to still come to the village, but I was more interested in maintaining that very aspect of what many people considered, stupid or archaic or uncivilized culture, that I was profoundly sad. And my mom would never forget that. She was like, this guy has always been crazy from when he was a little child. So I think it's, writing about these things now, I'm not surprised. I've always been very interested. I've always been the guy who is mourning these things that are dying. I want technology, I want whatnot to come to Nigeria. Obviously I want, but I want, I go to a place like Edinburgh in the UK, and this is a city that has maintained its architecture. Everything is almost intact from a particular time in history. And you go to Nigeria, you cannot find what did our architecture look like in the 17th century. We've thrown all of these things out because, we like the way that Americans build and all British people and whatnot. So what is for other people is just more interesting. So that is, I think that is a drive, to kind of preserve in form of a museum of books, let's say, that I'm trying to do. I mean, it might be an effort in futility, but there's a satisfaction that comes from, writing a novel like An Orchestra of Minorities.
Thank you so much, Chigozie. I would like everyone to go away with this image of a museum of books in our minds. Infelizmente, chegamos ao final do nosso tempo, mas só resta agradecer.
Unfortunately, we have reached the end of our time together. I would like to thank profusely our guests, Itamar and Chigozie, and all of you who were watching us today. And thank you so much, and good evening.
Thank you.
Obrigado.
Hey, thank you so much, Angel and Itamar. What a pleasure.